Most people believe money is won through effort. Wake up early, work hard, save diligently, and wealth will eventually arrive as a reward for good behavior. It is a comforting story. It is also, according to the deeper logic of power, largely false. Because effort alone has never built empires. Perception has. Positioning has. The quiet, invisible manipulation of information, timing, and human psychology has. 2,500 years ago, a general named Sun Tzu studied warfare not as a contest of strength, but as a contest of minds. He observed that the greatest victories were won before a single sword was drawn, through deception, positioning, and the careful reading of human nature. He warned that those who only understood open combat would always lose to those who understood the terrain no one else could see. Money and power obey the same hidden rules. While the average person is taught to fight the visible battle, the resume, the raise, the side hustle, a smaller number of people have learned to fight a different war entirely. A war fought in perception. A war fought in patience. A war fought over who controls information, who controls time, and who controls the desires of others. This is the war that decides who stays trapped in decades of labor for diminishing returns, and who quietly accumulates leverage until one day, without anyone noticing the shift, they are simply free. Most people will spend their entire working lives fighting a battle they were never equipped to win, because no one ever showed them the real rules of the game. The system does not need to hide these rules. It only needs you to never think to look for them. Sun Tzu understood something the modern world has almost forgotten, that power is rarely seized by force. It is arranged, quietly, long before anyone notices it has changed hands. In the chapters ahead, we uncover the dark psychology behind how wealth and power actually move, the deception the powerful rely on, the patience they practice, and the invisible battlefield where most people never realize the war has already begun. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme strategist wins the war before the first battle is fought. By the time armies meet on open ground, the outcome has often already been decided, by terrain scouted in advance, by alliances formed in silence, by information one side possessed and the other did not. Most people never think to apply this principle to money, because they were never taught that wealth has a battlefield at all. But it does. And it is almost entirely invisible. Consider two employees at the same company. One works harder, stays later, takes on more tasks. The other spends less visible effort but positions himself near decision-makers, learns which skills the company will need in 18 months, and quietly builds relationships with people who control future opportunities. When the promotion comes, it rarely goes to the person who worked the hardest. It goes to the person who was already standing in the right place when the decision was made. The battle was won before anyone else realized it had started. This is not luck. This is not injustice. This is positioning, the oldest weapon in Sun Tzu's arsenal, and the one modern education almost never teaches. The same principle explains why early investors in a technology, a neighborhood, or an industry accumulate wealth that latecomers can never catch up to, no matter how hard they work once they arrive. They were not smarter. They were simply positioned before the crowd noticed the terrain had value. Ask yourself, in your own life, where are you fighting the visible battle, the overtime, the extra shift, the constant motion, while the real battlefield, the one where positioning and information decide the outcome, goes completely unattended? Most people never notice this gap until years have already passed. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it, because the next question is far more uncomfortable. If positioning wins the war before it starts, what weapon do the powerful use to make sure you never see the battlefield at all? Sun Tzu opened his most famous teaching with a single, uncomfortable truth: all warfare is based on deception. Not dishonesty for its own sake, but the deliberate shaping of what the opponent perceives to be true. Appear weak when you are strong. Appear far when you are near. Let the enemy believe he understands the situation, while you understand something deeper. The powerful have never stopped using this weapon. They have simply moved it from the battlefield into the marketplace. Consider how an entire industry can be shaped by controlling not the product, but the perception of what the product is worth. In the late 19th century, one American industrialist did not merely produce oil more efficiently than his competitors, he controlled the pipelines, the barrels, and the railroads that carried it, until buyers and sellers alike had no accurate picture of the market except through him. He was not the strongest refiner. He was the only one who understood that whoever controls perception controls price. The same weapon operates today in quieter forms. A product is not scarce, but it is marketed as limited. A brand is not essential, but it is positioned as identity. A financial product is not designed for the buyer's benefit, but for the seller's margin, wrapped in language that sounds like opportunity. Think of the last purchase you made that you didn't strictly need. Was the desire truly yours, or was it engineered, carefully, by someone who understood exactly which emotional lever to pull? This is not a call to cynicism. It is a call to awareness. Because the moment you recognize deception as a tool, you can stop being its target, and start asking a far more dangerous question: what happens once you learn to use this same weapon of perception in your own favor? Sun Tzu's next principle answers that question directly, and it begins with a truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding: preparation, not effort, is what wins the war. Sun Tzu made a distinction that most people never learn: victorious strategists win first, then go to war. Defeated strategists go to war first, and hope to find victory along the way. It sounds almost too simple to matter. But look closely at how wealth is actually built, and you will find this single distinction separating those who escape the rat race from those who remain trapped in it for decades. The average person treats opportunity as something to react to. A stock tip arrives, and only then do they scramble to learn what a stock even is. A business idea appears, and only then do they begin searching for capital they don't have. They go to war first, unprepared, and call the result bad luck when it fails. The strategist operates in reverse. Warren Buffett did not begin studying businesses the day he found one worth buying. By the time an opportunity reached him, decades of study had already prepared him to recognize it in seconds. Charlie Munger described their advantage plainly: they were not smarter than everyone else in the room, they had simply spent longer preparing for a moment most people weren't ready for when it finally arrived. This is uncomfortable, because it means most financial failure isn't a failure of courage. It's a failure of preparation. The capital wasn't ready. The knowledge wasn't ready. The relationships weren't ready. So when the opportunity appeared, there was nothing to meet it with. Ask yourself honestly, if the opportunity of your lifetime appeared tomorrow, would you be prepared to recognize it, or would you be starting from zero the moment it arrived? This is where most people quietly get trapped, not because opportunity never comes, but because they were never positioned to use it. And it raises an even more unsettling question: what invisible forces are working, right now, to make sure you stay unprepared? Sun Tzu's next principle exposes exactly that: the architecture built to keep the unprepared exactly where they are. Sun Tzu taught that to defeat an enemy, you must first understand him, his patterns, his weaknesses, his instincts. What he never explicitly said, but what every strategist eventually learns, is that this principle cuts both ways. If understanding your enemy is a path to victory, then being understood, in the same way, by someone else, is a path to defeat. This is the uncomfortable truth behind consumer culture. It was not built by accident. It was built by people who studied human impulse with the same precision Sun Tzu studied terrain, and who discovered that a population trained to seek instant gratification is a population that will rarely accumulate enough patience to become powerful. Consider the ordinary trap of lifestyle inflation. A young professional gets a raise. Within months, a nicer apartment, a newer car, small upgrades that each feel reasonable in isolation. 5 years later, income has doubled, but so has spending, and the gap between the two, the only gap that ever produces freedom, has not grown at all. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was hidden. The trap worked because it was designed around a predictable weakness: the desire to feel, immediately, like progress is happening. This is not a conspiracy of villains meeting in secret rooms. It is simpler and more effective than that: an entire economy of incentives, each individually rational, that collectively profit from delay never being chosen over comfort. Ask yourself, how many of your monthly expenses exist because they improve your life, and how many exist because they were the path of least resistance in a system built to keep you spending? The system does not need you to fail. It only needs you to never notice the pattern. And once you notice it, a new question emerges, one Sun Tzu answers with a single, quiet weapon most people are never taught to wield. Sun Tzu never rushed a battle he could win by waiting. He understood that the ground itself could be a weapon, that a strategist who holds position while the enemy exhausts himself will win without striking a single blow. Patience, to Sun Tzu, was not passivity. It was one of the most aggressive tools available to a disciplined mind. Modern wealth psychology calls this delayed gratification, but the phrase undersells what is actually happening. Delaying gratification is not simply resisting temptation. It is choosing to hold territory, capital, time, attention, while everyone else abandons theirs for immediate comfort. Naval Ravikant has described wealth as something that compounds quietly for those who can tolerate looking, for years, like nothing is happening. This is precisely the discomfort that eliminates most competition before it even begins. A modest sum invested consistently over 20 years does not look impressive in year 2, or year 5, or even year 10. It looks, to an impatient observer, like a mistake. Only the strategist who understands terrain over time recognizes that the slow accumulation was never a mistake, it was the entire plan. Picture two co-workers earning the same salary. One spends every raise as it arrives, enjoying visible upgrades year after year. The other invests the difference and appears, for a decade, to be living a smaller life. By year 15, one of them has options, to leave a job, to take a risk, to say no. The other does not. Nothing separated them except which battlefield they chose to hold. Where in your own life are you abandoning long-term terrain for a short-term win that will mean nothing in 5 years? This is the trap that catches even disciplined people. Patience without direction is just delay. Which is why holding terrain means nothing if you don't know how to use it once it's yours. That is where leverage enters the battlefield. Sun Tzu taught that the skilled strategist uses the strength of the terrain and the momentum of circumstance to accomplish what raw force alone never could. He did not send soldiers to exhaust themselves pushing boulders uphill. He positioned them where the hill itself did the work. This is the essence of leverage, not more effort, but a better multiplier for the effort already spent. Most people are taught only one form of wealth building: trade hours for money. It is the only battlefield they are ever shown, so it becomes the only one they fight on, year after year, with a ceiling that never moves no matter how skilled they become. There are only so many hours in a day, and a strategy built entirely on personal hours is a strategy with a hard limit built into its foundation. Andrew Carnegie understood a different terrain entirely. He did not personally mine, smelt, and sell every ton of steel his company produced. He built systems, capital, labor, logistics, relationships, that multiplied far beyond what one man's hours could ever generate. Decades later, Jeff Bezos applied the same logic to infrastructure rather than steel: build the system once, let it serve millions without additional personal hours attached to each transaction. Neither man became wealthy by working harder than everyone around him. Both became wealthy by refusing to let personal hours remain the only multiplier available to them. This is uncomfortable for the employee mindset, because it suggests that hard work, without leverage attached to it, has a ceiling that discipline alone cannot break through. Ask yourself, how much of your income this year came from hours you personally traded, and how much came from systems, capital, or relationships working on your behalf while you slept? Leverage is where strategic patience finally pays its dividend. But there is a final battlefield still waiting, one that convinces even the wealthy to spend their leverage on the wrong target entirely. Sun Tzu warned that a strategist who chases every skirmish will win battles and still lose the war. He understood that not every fight offered by the enemy needs to be accepted, and that many battlefields are designed specifically to drain a strong opponent's resources on something that was never worth winning. Status is the most effective version of this trap the modern world has ever built. The car in the driveway, the label on the jacket, the neighborhood address, none of these generate leverage. They consume it. Yet an entire economy is engineered to make these purchases feel like proof of victory rather than what they actually are: capital spent on an audience that, in most cases, is not paying nearly as much attention as the buyer assumes. Picture two people who each build significant wealth by their 40s. One spends the next decade upgrading the visible symbols, the car, the watch, the house that photographs well. The other spends that same decade quietly acquiring assets no one else can see. 10 years later, the first has an impressive appearance and shrinking options. The second has expanding freedom and no need to announce it. Only one of them was actually still fighting the strategic war. The other had already won it and walked away from the battlefield that never mattered. This is the final deception, and it is the cruelest one, because it is often self-inflicted. The system does not need to trick you into chasing status. It only needs you to never ask whether the battle was worth fighting in the first place. Ask yourself, of the wealth-signaling choices in your own life, how many were built for your freedom, and how many were built for an audience that will forget them by next week? Real power was never loud. It was simply free, and that freedom is where every principle in this script has been leading. Sun Tzu never taught his students to fight harder. He taught them to see clearer, to recognize the terrain, the timing, and the deception before committing a single resource to battle. Everything in this script has been one continuous unfolding of that same idea, applied not to armies, but to the quiet war for financial freedom that most people never realize they are fighting. You now understand that positioning wins before effort ever enters the field. That perception is a weapon wielded by those who control it, and a trap for those who don't recognize it. That preparation, not courage, determines who is ready when opportunity finally arrives. That the architecture of modern life is built to keep patience rare, which is exactly why patience, when practiced deliberately, becomes so powerful. That leverage multiplies what hours alone never could. And that status, the loudest battlefield of all, is often the least worth fighting on. None of this required luck. None of it required permission. It required only what Sun Tzu offered his students 2,500 years ago, the willingness to see the battlefield clearly, before stepping onto it. Most people will close this video and change nothing, because insight without action is simply entertainment. But you were not looking for entertainment. You were looking for the terrain no one else could see, and now you have it. The question is no longer whether the game is rigged. It always was, for those who never learned its rules. The question now is whether you will keep fighting the visible battle everyone else is losing, or whether you will start fighting the one that actually decides who becomes free. Sun Tzu did not create warriors who fought the most. He created strategists who won the most, quietly, patiently, before anyone else even realized the war had begun. Which one will you choose to be?